2016, a woman named Maya Torres arrived quietly at a military base deep in the deserts of Afghanistan. To everyone there, she was just another new worker, a civilian cook assigned to the mess hall. Her job was simple: prepare food, serve meals, clean up, and stay out of the soldiers' way. No one paid much attention to her. After all, she wasn't wearing a uniform or badges. She didn't shout orders or talk about missions. She just came, worked, and went back to her small room near the kitchen. But from the first day, there was something different about Maya. She didn't act like a normal cook. She moved with purpose, sharp, controlled, and calm, like someone who had spent years following strict training. When the base was loud and chaotic, Maya stayed focused, never flustered. Her eyes were always alert, scanning her surroundings without even realizing it. Soldiers joked that she was too serious for a kitchen lady. Some thought she was just shy. Others whispered that maybe she had been through something before coming here. Every morning before sunrise, Maya would walk across the dusty courtyard to the mess hall. The air was cold, and the sound of distant helicopters filled the sky. She would start the stoves, chop vegetables, and hum quietly to herself. To most, she seemed like any ordinary worker trying to make a living in a war zone. But inside, Maya carried a storm of memories she could never share. Years ago, she had been one of the best soldiers in a special forces unit. Her team was called Task Force Shadow, a small, secret group trained for missions no one else could handle. They operated in silence, under the radar, saving lives and stopping threats the world never heard about. But one mission changed everything. Something went wrong. Her team was betrayed and left behind. Everyone she fought beside was either captured or killed. Somehow, Maya survived, but at a terrible cost. She disappeared afterward, erased from the system, and tried to live a normal life. When she took the cook's job at the base, she thought it was her second chance. A quiet life away from danger. She told herself she wasn't a soldier anymore. No more weapons. No more missions. Just food and peace. But even in the kitchen, the habits never left her. She still woke up at 4 a.m. without an alarm. She still checked every corner when entering a room. She still ate facing the door. Old training dies hard. The soldiers at the base didn't know any of this. To them, she was just Miss Maya, the cook who made good food and never talked much. Some tried to make small talk, but she kept her answers short and polite. Yes, sir. No, sir. More coffee. She smiled sometimes, but her eyes always looked distant, as if part of her mind was somewhere else. One afternoon, during lunch rush, a young private accidentally dropped a tray of hot soup. The pot crashed, and boiling liquid splashed across the floor. Everyone panicked except Maya. In one swift move, she grabbed a towel, pushed the soldier away from the spill, and prevented the pot from falling onto anyone's feet. It all happened in seconds. The way she moved, fast, calculated, controlled, made everyone pause. "You move like a soldier," one of the cooks joked. Maya just smiled faintly and said, "Old habits." That night, while the rest of the base relaxed, Maya sat outside behind the mess hall. She looked at the sky, stars faint behind the desert dust, and ran her fingers over her left arm. Beneath the long sleeve of her shirt was something no one had seen yet. A small tattoo of a falcon clutching a dagger, the mark of Task Force Shadow. She touched it gently, remembering her fallen teammates, and whispered, "I'm still here." Maya didn't know that soon, that small tattoo would change everything again. For now, she was content to stay invisible. She served food, cleaned up, and listened quietly as soldiers shared stories about their families or their time in the field. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she went silent. No one guessed that she had once led men like them through gunfire and darkness. At night, she often woke from dreams, flashes of explosions, the sound of gunfire, the faces of her lost unit. She'd sit on her bunk, take a deep breath, and remind herself, "You're safe. You're just a cook now." But even she didn't fully believe it. There was always a part of her that felt like she was being watched. Old instincts, maybe, or maybe, deep down, she knew that her past was never truly gone. Days turned into weeks, and Maya slowly became part of the rhythm of base life. Soldiers respected her for her discipline and kindness. They said she made the best stew and never complained, even when the workload was heavy. Still, nobody really knew her, and that's how she liked it. The quieter she stayed, the safer she felt. But fate had other plans, because in places like this, secrets never stay buried for long. And one quiet afternoon, as she handed a tray of food to a new officer, a man with sharp eyes and a decorated uniform, her sleeve slipped just enough for him to see the edge of that falcon tattoo. His expression changed instantly. He froze, eyes locked on her arm, his hand trembling slightly. Maya didn't notice it then, but in that moment, her hidden past had just been discovered. Her new life as a simple cook was about to end. Life at the base continued as usual, but people slowly started noticing that Maya wasn't like the other workers. She never spoke much, never laughed loudly, and never joined the others when they relaxed after long shifts. She kept her world small, from her room to the kitchen and back again. But her presence had a strange effect on people. There was something about the way she carried herself, calm, alert, and confident, that made even senior soldiers pause when she walked by. The younger soldiers often whispered about her during meal breaks. "She's got military posture," one said. "Maybe she's ex-military," another replied. "No man, she's too quiet. Cooks don't stand like that." They laughed, but their curiosity grew day by day. Nobody had seen her lose her temper, panic, or even look tired. She worked from dawn till night without complaining once. One evening, while everyone was eating, a small fight broke out in the dining area between two soldiers. Chairs clattered, trays fell, and the room erupted in noise. Before anyone could call security, Maya was already there. She moved quickly, stepping between the men, her voice calm but firm. "Enough," she said sharply. Her tone wasn't loud, but it had power. The two soldiers froze instantly, surprised at how quickly she took control. Within seconds, the fight was over. When things settled, one of the officers joked, "Remind me not to mess with the cook." Everyone laughed, but a few soldiers exchanged glances. They'd seen that kind of command before from trained leaders, not from kitchen staff. Later that night, a few of them sat outside, talking about her. "Did you see how she handled that?" one said. "She didn't even hesitate." Another nodded. "And the way she stood, like she was trained to take someone down if she had to." From that day, the whispers began. They started calling her Sergeant Chef as a joke, not realizing how close they were to the truth. Maya, of course, noticed the looks and quiet comments, but she didn't let it bother her. She knew better than to draw attention to herself. She had survived by staying invisible. The less people knew, the safer she was. Still, sometimes she caught herself reacting like a soldier again, watching exits, noticing details others ignored, always sitting where she could see the door. It wasn't fear, it was instinct. One afternoon, while chopping vegetables, a young private came into the kitchen. He was new to the base and clumsy, often getting in trouble. He offered to help, but when he tried to lift a heavy pot, it slipped, and hot water splashed onto the counter. Without thinking, Maya reached out and grabbed the pot handle, barehanded, moving it before it could spill on him. Her movements were fast, precise, almost too fast. The soldier stared at her in shock. "That was wow," he said. "You reacted like you've done that before." She smiled lightly and said, "Cooking teaches you to move fast." But deep inside, she knew that wasn't the real reason. Her body still remembered the years of combat training, the drills, the missions. It was part of her, no matter how hard she tried to forget. A few days later, another worker noticed the faint scars on her arm when her sleeve slipped up. "That's not from cooking," she said curiously. Maya quickly rolled her sleeve back down and smiled. "Long story," she replied, hoping that would end the conversation. But it didn't. The next day, people were talking again. "Did you see her arm?" someone said. "Looks like a bullet wound." Others guessed maybe she had been in some kind of accident. Nobody knew the truth, that those marks were from the night her entire team was ambushed and she barely made it out alive. At night, when the kitchen was quiet, Maya sometimes found herself staring at her reflection in the metal counter. The woman staring back looked tired, older, and different. She wasn't the same fearless soldier who once led men through the shadows. She told herself she was just a cook now, but in her heart, she still felt the weight of the uniform she no longer wore. Sometimes she would hear the sound of helicopters overhead and pause mid-step. The noise would bring back flashes of her old missions. Running through sandstorms, radio static, gunfire in the distance. She would shake her head, push the memories away, and return to chopping vegetables or cleaning dishes. But no matter how hard she tried, the past was always there, waiting just beneath the surface. There was one soldier, Corporal Dean, who seemed more curious than the rest. He watched her closely, not out of suspicion, but fascination. "You don't belong in this kitchen," he said once, half joking. "You walk like you've been trained to kill." Maya smiled but said nothing. "Am I right?" he pressed. "Maybe," she finally said softly, "but maybe that's just how I carry the weight of old memories." That made him go quiet. He didn't ask again. As days passed, the whispers turned into quiet respect. People began treating her differently, not just as the cook, but as someone with depth and mystery. When soldiers returned from dangerous patrols, they often found her waiting with a warm meal and calm eyes that seemed to understand what they couldn't say. It was like she knew what fear and loss felt like. And she did. Every time she looked into their faces, she remembered her own team, her brothers and sisters from Task Force Shadow, and the night they were left behind. She had promised herself never to think about it again, never to open that wound. But the longer she stayed on the base, the harder it became to hide. Maya had escaped her past, but she couldn't escape who she was. The discipline, the instincts, the silence, they gave her away, even if no one knew the full story. And though the soldiers only whispered about her in passing, one man was about to notice something they all missed. Someone who had once known the truth about Task Force Shadow, and someone who would recognize the tattoo she had tried to keep hidden for years. Her quiet life was beginning to tremble under the weight of secrets that were no longer safe. It was a hot afternoon when the news spread around the base. A new commanding officer was arriving. Everyone hurried to make things look perfect. Soldiers lined up, vehicles were cleaned, and the mess hall was told to prepare something special. The name going around was Colonel Richard Hayes, a respected and strict officer known for his sharp eyes and no-nonsense attitude. People said he had seen too many wars and carried the weight of them all. Maya didn't pay much attention to the news. For her, it was just another day. She focused on chopping vegetables, stirring soup, and making sure lunch was ready on time. To her, a colonel was just another person who would come, eat, and leave. She had seen hundreds of officers during her time as a soldier. Men who looked powerful on the outside but had no idea what real battle felt like. Still, she kept her head down and stayed quiet, just as she always did. When Colonel Hayes finally arrived at the base, the atmosphere changed. The soldiers straightened their backs, and even the most relaxed officers suddenly acted more disciplined. The colonel was tall, serious, and spoke very little. His eyes, however, seemed to see everything. He walked through the camp inspecting every corner, the barracks, the vehicles, the security checkpoints, until he finally made his way toward the mess hall. Maya was serving food when he walked in. The chatter died down instantly. Everyone stood a little taller. The colonel nodded politely to the soldiers and took a tray. He didn't say much, just observed everything with quiet focus. When he reached the serving counter, Maya was there, ladling stew into bowls. For a second, their eyes met. Hers calm but tired, his sharp and searching. She gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that carried authority without effort. "Welcome to the base, sir," Maya replied softly. As she handed him the tray, the sleeve of her shirt slipped slightly, revealing part of her forearm. The colonel's gaze dropped for just a second, but that was enough. He froze. His eyes widened slightly as he saw something most people wouldn't even notice. A small falcon tattoo inked near her wrist, almost faded now, but still clear to someone who knew what it meant. It was the insignia of Task Force Shadow, a special forces unit that had disappeared years ago. The same unit he had once commanded missions for. The same unit the government had declared dead after a failed operation. He remembered every face from that team, and among them there had been one woman, a brave, quiet sergeant named Maya Torres. But she was supposed to be gone. The report said she had died in an ambush. He had read her name on the list himself. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, serving food in a base kitchen. The colonel didn't react right away. Years of discipline kept his face calm. He took his tray, gave her a nod, and walked to his seat. But inside, his mind was spinning. How could she be alive? Why was she here under a civilian name? Why was there no record of her return? As he ate, he watched her quietly. Every small detail caught his attention. The way she moved with precision, her posture, her awareness of every sound around her. She wasn't just a cook. That was clear. No civilian carried themselves like that. After lunch, Hayes went back to his office and called for the personnel file of the woman working in the mess hall. When the documents arrived, his confusion deepened. The file listed Maya Torres as a civilian contractor, hired 2 years earlier. No military record, no previous service, no next of kin. It was a perfectly clean file, too clean. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the paper. "That's impossible," he muttered. Someone had erased her past. Someone powerful enough to wipe out an entire service history. That night he couldn't shake the thought. He walked outside, the desert wind blowing softly across the base. The stars were bright, but his mind was full of questions. He remembered the mission, the one that ended Task Force Shadow. It had been a disaster. The official story said the team was wiped out after going rogue. But rumors whispered something different, that the mission had been abandoned on purpose to hide a political mistake. If Maya had survived that, it meant she knew the truth. And that truth could destroy careers, maybe even end lives. The next morning, the colonel returned to the mess hall earlier than usual. Maya was already there, serving breakfast. She looked surprised to see him so early but didn't say anything. He walked up to her quietly and said, "You're very disciplined for a civilian." She gave a small shrug. "Old habits, sir. Old habits," he repeated softly, watching her face carefully. "You know, I once knew someone with that same tattoo." For a moment, Maya's hand stopped mid-motion. Then she smiled faintly and said, "A lot of people have tattoos, Colonel." Her tone was calm, but her eyes had changed, a flicker of tension behind them. He didn't push further. "I suppose you're right," he said with a nod, taking his food and walking away. But both of them knew the truth. The secret was no longer hidden. Later that day, Hayes called an old contact in intelligence. "Run the name Maya Torres again," he said. The man on the other end paused. "Colonel, that name's classified. You don't want to open that file." Hayes frowned. "She's alive. I've seen her." There was silence. Then the voice said quietly, "Then you didn't see her. Because if she's alive, that means someone lied to us all." The colonel hung up the phone and stared out the window. The quiet cook he'd met that morning wasn't just a survivor. She was the key to something much bigger. And whether she liked it or not, her past was about to come back into the light. For Maya, it was just another day of serving food. For Colonel Hayes, it was the day everything he thought he knew began to crumble. Colonel Hayes couldn't get the image of that tattoo out of his mind. The small falcon inked on Maya's arm haunted him. It was more than a mark. It was proof of something impossible. He had read her name years ago on the casualty list after the failed Task Force Shadow mission. The official report said every member of the unit had died in an explosion deep in enemy territory. But now, one of them was standing in his mess hall, alive and pretending to be a cook. That night, long after most of the base had gone to sleep, the colonel sat alone in his office, files spread across his desk. He requested every record related to Maya Torres, but what he found made no sense. Her official file started only 2 years ago, listing her as a civilian kitchen contractor. No mention of her enlistment, no rank history, no deployments, nothing. It was as if her entire life before that date had been erased from the system. He frowned, flipping through the pages. "Someone cleaned her record," he muttered. "Completely. That kind of thing didn't just happen. It required authority, high-level authority. Only someone deep in the chain of command could delete a soldier's past so thoroughly. The colonel leaned back in his chair and thought about the mission, the one that had destroyed Task Force Shadow. He remembered the briefings, the strange orders, and how the communication lines suddenly went silent during the operation. Then came the cover-up. Command declared the mission unsanctioned, blaming the soldiers for disobeying orders. The truth had always felt wrong to him, but he had been forced to accept it. Now, seeing Maya alive, he knew there was more to the story. The next morning, the colonel went about his usual duties, but his eyes kept drifting toward the mess hall. Maya moved with the same quiet control she always had, but he noticed something different now. Small details he had missed before. Her stance, her awareness, even the way she scanned the room subtly as she worked. These were not habits of a cook. They were survival skills. He decided to confront her, but not directly, not yet. At lunchtime, when the crowd was gone, he walked into the mess hall alone. Maya was wiping down tables, her sleeves rolled up slightly. The faint outline of the falcon tattoo was visible again. The colonel stepped closer and spoke quietly. "That tattoo. It's from Task Force Shadow, isn't it?" Maya froze. The cloth in her hand stopped moving. For a moment, she didn't turn around. Then, slowly, she looked up at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "You have a good memory, Colonel," she said softly. "So it's true," he replied. "You were one of them." She sighed and looked away. "Once, a long time ago, I thought you were dead," he said almost to himself. "I was supposed to be," Maya answered. "At least that's what they wanted." The colonel stared at her. "What happened out there, Maya?" She shook her head. "You don't want to know, sir." "But I do," he insisted. "Because the official story never made sense. They said your unit went rogue. But I've never believed that." Maya looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "We didn't go rogue, Colonel. We were left behind." Her words hit him like a punch. "Left behind?" She nodded. "Command sent us on a mission to extract a local informant. We completed the objective, but when things went wrong, our calls for backup were ignored. They cut our comms, erased our existence, and walked away." The colonel's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. No one would abandon an entire unit." Maya gave a sad, tired smile. "Believe what you want. I lived it." She turned away, as if the conversation was over, but the colonel couldn't let it go. "Why didn't you come forward? Why hide here?" Her voice was calm but cold. "Because the moment they find out I'm alive, they'll finish what they started. I was supposed to disappear, Colonel. I did until now." The colonel stood in silence, his mind racing. Everything she said explained the strange holes in her file, the erased records, the whispers that surrounded that doomed mission. Someone had wanted Task Force Shadow to vanish, and they had almost succeeded. That night, Hayes sat in his quarters, replaying their conversation. If what Maya said was true, then someone high up had ordered a cover-up, maybe even used him without his knowledge. He felt anger rise in his chest, but also guilt. If he had asked more questions back then, maybe her team wouldn't have been lost. Meanwhile, Maya couldn't sleep either. She sat on her bed, staring at the small photo she kept hidden in her bag. Her old team, smiling before the mission that destroyed them. She whispered their names one by one, her eyes full of sadness. For years, she had buried the soldier inside her. But now that the colonel knew the truth, she felt the walls of her quiet life starting to crack. The next day, word spread quietly that the colonel had requested secure communications with headquarters. No one knew what it was about, but Maya suspected it was connected to her. When she saw him at lunch, he didn't speak to her, but she could tell from his expression that he was troubled. He had probably found something, or someone had warned him to stop digging. Later that evening, while Maya was closing the kitchen, she noticed two unfamiliar men walking around the base. They weren't soldiers she recognized, and their eyes lingered on her for a moment too long. Her stomach tightened. Old instincts kicked in. She turned off the lights and stepped outside, scanning the shadows. The air felt heavier that night, charged with danger. She knew what was happening. The moment the colonel found out the truth, Someone somewhere had been alerted. The people who erased her past would not let it resurface easily. Inside his office, Colonel Hayes sat in silence, staring at his computer screen. A red message flashed across it. Access denied, classified operation. He exhaled slowly. Someone didn't want him to know the full truth. And outside, in the darkness, Maya knew the same thing. The past she had tried to bury was coming back, and this time, it might cost her everything. The next evening, the base was quieter than usual. The soldiers had finished their duties, and the sun was setting behind the dusty hills, painting the sky with shades of red and gold. Maya stood behind the mess hall, washing dishes under a weak yellow light. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was far away, replaying the conversation she'd had with Colonel Hayes. For years, she had hidden the truth, buried it deep, and now it was finally out. Someone knew who she really was. She had seen the look in the colonel's eyes, a mix of shock, guilt, and understanding. He wasn't just curious. He was remembering the mission too. The one that destroyed her unit and almost took her life. The memories came flooding back. The sound of gunfire, the burning smell of smoke, her team's voices shouting over the radio that never answered. It had been 5 years, but those sounds still echoed in her dreams. That night, Maya sat alone in her small room, staring at the tattoo on her arm. The falcon's wings were fading now, just like the people it represented. She traced the outline with her finger and whispered, "I survived, but for what?" The silence in the room felt heavy, as if the ghosts of her old team were sitting beside her. Across the base, Colonel Hayes was pacing inside his office. He couldn't rest either. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the classified reports, the missing files, the erased records. He had served long enough to know what that meant. Someone had buried the truth on purpose. And if Maya's story was real, it meant the army had abandoned its own soldiers and then covered it up. He picked up the phone and made a secure call to a contact in the intelligence division. "I need information on Task Force Shadow," he said. The voice on the other end hesitated. "Colonel, that file is sealed under top-level clearance. You're not authorized." "I was part of that operation," he replied firmly. "I have the right to know what really happened." There was a long silence. Then the voice lowered. "Sir, if you value your career, stop asking questions. Some things are better left buried." The line went dead. Hayes sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of frustration pressing on his chest. Someone high up was pulling strings. Someone who didn't want Maya's survival to become known. That meant she was in danger, and so was he if he kept digging. The next morning, Maya noticed the change immediately. There were 2 new faces around the base. Men in plain clothes, pretending to inspect supplies but clearly watching people. When she walked by, their eyes followed her. They didn't say anything, but she recognized that look. They weren't ordinary officers. They were intelligence men. And they weren't there for supplies, they were there for her. Her heartbeat quickened. She knew this pattern too well. When something was supposed to stay hidden, these kinds of men appeared. Quietly, efficiently, and without mercy. She tried to stay calm and continue her work, but every instinct screamed that she needed to be ready. That evening, as she was leaving the mess hall, Colonel Hayes stopped her. His face was serious. "We need to talk," he said quietly. They stepped outside, away from the others. The air was cool, and the sound of generators hummed in the distance. "Maya," he began, "I made some calls. Someone's watching you." "I know," she said before he could continue. "They've been watching me since yesterday." He frowned. "You need to understand what this means. If what you told me is true, they're not just trying to keep your story quiet. They're making sure it never comes out." Maya looked at him calmly. "I've lived in silence for 5 years, Colonel. I knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would be here." He sighed. "Why didn't you come to me sooner? We could have helped you." Her eyes darkened. "Helped me? Like they helped my team?" "I begged for backup that night. No one came. No one even answered." The colonel had no reply. The guilt in his eyes said everything. He hadn't been there, but he was part of the same system that had abandoned her. After a long silence, he said, "You're not safe here. They'll come for you, quietly, officially, and no one will ever know you existed." Maya nodded. "Then I'll be ready." That night, she stayed awake, sitting on the edge of her bed, listening to every sound outside. The old soldier inside her, the one she tried to bury, was awake again. She checked her surroundings, found an old combat knife she had kept hidden in a drawer, and slipped it under her pillow. The cook had disappeared. The survivor had returned. Meanwhile, Colonel Hayes made another decision. He opened his private notebook and began writing everything he knew about Task Force Shadow: names, locations, mission codes, and the truth about the cover-up. If something happened to him or to Maya, someone had to know. He locked the file in his desk drawer, his mind restless and heavy with anger. Around midnight, Maya heard footsteps outside her door. Slow, careful, deliberate. She held her breath. The handle turned slightly, then stopped. After a few seconds, the steps faded away. She waited another minute before moving. She looked out the window but saw only shadows. Still, she knew someone had been there. When morning came, the air felt tense. The two plain-clothed men were gone, but Maya knew that didn't mean she was safe. She found the colonel in his office, and he looked like he hadn't slept either. "They tried your door last night, didn't they?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied. He nodded grimly. "They'll try again. But this time, I'll be ready too." For the first time, Maya saw something different in his eyes, not just command but conviction. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. And somewhere deep inside her, the part of her that used to lead soldiers began to stir again. She realized she wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was getting ready to face it. The past that haunted both of them was no longer just a memory. It was moving in the shadows of the base, alive and dangerous. And both Maya and Colonel Hayes knew. The truth was coming, and with it, a storm neither of them could escape. The next few days passed under a strange silence. Everyone at the base went about their duties as usual, but something in the air had changed. Soldiers whispered about secret meetings, late-night movements, and unmarked vehicles coming and going. Maya could feel the tension building, even if no one said it out loud. It was the kind of quiet that came before something bad happened, the same quiet she had felt before ambushes in the field. Colonel Hayes was different now too. He looked tired, his eyes always scanning, his movements faster and sharper. Maya noticed that he no longer stayed in his office for long periods. He was constantly walking around, checking the base security, talking in hushed tones with trusted officers. She knew he was trying to protect her, but she also knew that the people watching them were far above his authority. One afternoon, while Maya was preparing lunch, two soldiers she didn't recognize entered the kitchen. They said they were from supply inspection, but something about them felt off. Their uniforms were clean, their shoes spotless, not like men who worked in the field. One of them smiled too much, the other didn't smile at all. They asked too many questions. "How long have you been here?" one asked casually. 2 years, Maya replied without looking up. "Before that?" he pressed. She smiled faintly. "Different base, same kitchen." The man nodded, pretending to believe her, but his eyes lingered on her arm, right where her tattoo was hidden under her sleeve. After they left, Maya quietly locked the kitchen door and took a deep breath. She knew now they weren't inspectors. They were checking on her, confirming what the colonel had already discovered. Later that evening, Colonel Hayes came to the mess hall. His face was grim. "Those men from today," he said quietly, "they're not part of my team. They came from Intelligence Command." "I figured," Maya replied calmly, wiping her hands with a towel. "They saw me. They know." The colonel looked at her for a moment. "You could still leave. I can arrange transport to Kandahar. From there, you can disappear again." Maya shook her head. "I ran once, Colonel. I'm done running." He sighed deeply. "Then you should know what you're facing. I made more calls, asked more questions, and now my access has been frozen. I've been warned to stop digging." "Warned by who?" she asked. He looked at her with tired eyes. "People higher than either of us. They said if I keep asking about Task Force Shadow, I'll lose my command." Maya didn't look surprised. That's how it works. You try to uncover the truth, they make you disappear. Quietly, Hayes clenched his fists. They can't do that forever. Not if I have proof. She looked at him closely. Proof won't save you. I tried once. They erased everything. My record, my name, even my team's graves. If they can do that to us, they can do it to anyone. The colonel stayed silent for a long time. He realized that for Maya, survival wasn't about winning anymore. It was about staying one step ahead of a system designed to silence people like her. That night, the base lights flickered. Power outages were rare, but when they happened, it meant something was wrong. Maya immediately felt uneasy. She stepped outside the mess hall and looked around. The guards at the gate were tense, radios buzzing with static. The colonel appeared beside her, his face pale. Communications are down, he said. All external lines have been cut. A chill ran down Maya's spine. This isn't a technical fault, she said. They're isolating the base. Moments later, they heard it, the distant roar of engines, coming from beyond the perimeter wall. The colonel ordered the alarm raised, but before anyone could act, gunfire erupted from the hills. The base was under attack. Maya's instincts took over instantly. She grabbed a nearby rifle from a fallen soldier and ran toward the courtyard. The colonel shouted for reinforcements, but chaos had already spread. The attackers moved fast, too fast for an ordinary raid. Maya recognized the precision. These weren't random rebels. They were trained professionals. Someone had sent them. She took cover behind a supply truck and started firing back. Her aim was sharp and steady, every shot hitting its target. Soldiers around her looked shocked. Their quiet cook was suddenly moving like a battle-hardened veteran. She gave quick commands, directing troops to safer positions, covering their movements with perfect timing. Colonel Hayes joined her, shouting over the noise. You're leading them like a captain. Old habits, she said with a faint smile, reloading. The fight lasted nearly an hour before reinforcements from another sector arrived. The attackers retreated into the dark, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Dozens of soldiers were injured, but many were alive, thanks to Maya's quick actions. When the gunfire stopped, the base fell silent again, broken only by the crackle of burning debris. Hayes looked around at the surviving men. If it weren't for her, he said loudly, pointing to Maya, half of you wouldn't be standing right now. The soldiers looked at her with new eyes, not as a cook, but as one of them. Some even saluted her quietly. But Maya didn't smile. She knew this victory came with a price. Whoever sent that attack wasn't done. Later, in the colonel's office, she sat across from him, covered in dust and blood. He was shaken. They came for you, he said. That wasn't a random assault. They wanted to erase you again. I know, she said softly. But this time they failed. He looked at her with new respect and fear. The higher-ups will have to respond now. This will reach the top levels. Maya leaned back in her chair. Then maybe it's time the truth did too. Outside, the wounded were being treated, and the base was slowly returning to order. But both Maya and the colonel knew this was only the beginning. The attack had exposed something far deeper. A secret someone was desperate to bury. As the night grew darker, Maya stood by the window, watching the horizon. She could almost feel her old self returning. The soldier, the fighter, the survivor. The woman she had tried so hard to hide was alive again. And now that she was awake, she wouldn't hide anymore. The sun rose slowly over the mountains, lighting up the base that still smelled of smoke and gunpowder. The attack had left its mark. Walls were damaged, vehicles burned, and several soldiers were being treated for injuries. But the strange thing was no official report had come in. No orders from higher command, no mention on the military radio channels. It was as if the assault had never happened. Maya stood outside the mess hall, her clothes still stained with dirt and soot. She looked at the horizon silently, her thoughts heavy. She had seen many battles before, but this one was different. This time, the enemy wasn't wearing a uniform. This time, the danger came from the same system she had once served. Colonel Hayes approached her, holding a sealed envelope. His expression was hard to read. "This just arrived," he said, handing it to her. "Official message from command." Maya opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stamped with red letters, "Immediate transfer order. Maya L. Carter. Report to Central Command within 24 hours. She stared at it for a moment, then looked up. "Transfer order? After an attack like that?" Hayes nodded grimly. "It's not a transfer. It's a trap. They want to bring you in quietly, off the record." Maya folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. "Then they know I survived. And they're scared." The colonel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You saved this base, Maya. Everyone saw it. If they take you now, it'll raise questions. But they don't care about that. They just want to erase the evidence again." She met his eyes. "Then we won't give them the chance." Hayes hesitated. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to finish what I started," she said calmly. "If they want to silence me, then I'll make sure the truth comes out before they can." That afternoon, Maya went to the base's communication center. The building was half damaged from the attack, and technicians were still working to restore the satellite link. She quietly asked one of the junior officers for access to the encrypted line. He hesitated but handed her a small device. She connected it to the terminal and began typing quickly. Within minutes, she had broken into the secure archive where Task Force Shadow's records were hidden. She found the mission logs, the false reports, and even the names of the officers who had signed the cover-up orders. Her heart pounded as she read each document. Everything she had told the colonel was true, and worse. The mission that wiped out her team had been planned to fail. They were sent as bait. Her hands trembled slightly as she saved the files onto a small data drive. She knew that if she got caught, this would be seen as treason. But she also knew this was her only chance to make things right. Suddenly, the door opened. Colonel Hayes stepped in. "You shouldn't be here," he said sharply, glancing around. "If anyone sees you accessing those files—" "They already tried to kill me once, Colonel," she interrupted. "If I don't do this, they'll just do it again." He sighed, then closed the door behind him. "You've got 5 minutes before the system logs your access." She nodded and worked faster. Once the files were copied, she disconnected the drive and handed it to him. "Keep it safe. If something happens to me, you'll know what to do." He looked at the small device, then at her. "You're planning to go alone, aren't you?" Maya smiled faintly. "You can't protect me from them, Hayes, but you can protect the truth." Before he could stop her, she walked out. That night, she packed a small bag and took an old Jeep from the vehicle lot. The base was quiet, the guards tired from the long night. She drove toward the edge of the desert, headlights off, following the narrow path that led to an abandoned outpost, the same place where her old unit had fallen. She needed to see it again, to face the ghosts that had followed her for so long. The wind howled as she arrived at the ruins. The air smelled of dust and memories. She walked among the broken walls, remembering every face, every voice of the teammates she had lost. In her mind, she could still hear their laughter, their confidence before that doomed mission. She knelt down and touched the ground where her captain had fallen. "I didn't forget," she whispered. "I came back." Suddenly, headlights appeared in the distance. A convoy of black vehicles was approaching, no insignia, no markings. Maya stood slowly, her hand tightening around her weapon. She knew who they were. They had come for her. She took cover behind a wall as the cars stopped. A group of men stepped out, dressed in black tactical gear. One of them called out, "Maya Carter, you are ordered to surrender immediately under Directive Code 7-1. She laughed softly under her breath. "You erased me once," she said. "You won't do it again." The first shots rang out. The night lit up with gunfire. Maya moved like a shadow, every movement sharp and precise. She used the terrain to her advantage, taking down the soldiers one by one. But they kept coming. There were too many. Back at the base, Colonel Hayes was staring at the data drive. He couldn't sit still anymore. He turned to his communications officer. "Send a distress signal to command," he ordered. and forward this data to every news outlet with military clearance. If they want to hide it, we'll make sure the world sees it first." The officer hesitated. "Sir, that's against regulation." Hayes looked at him firmly. "So is covering up murder." He hit the transmit button himself. The data uploaded into the system, sending Maya's truth across multiple secure channels. The secret was out. Meanwhile, at the ruins, Maya was running low on ammunition. Her shoulder was bleeding, but she didn't stop. As the last few men closed in, she smiled through the pain. She could already hear helicopters in the distance. Reinforcements were coming. The colonel had done it. He had sent help. With her last strength, she fired one more shot and dropped behind the wall. The world around her blurred, but in her heart, she felt peace. For the first time in years, she had fought not to survive, but to make her team's sacrifice mean something. The sound of approaching soldiers faded as everything went dark. Back at the base, the colonel received confirmation that the story had spread. The cover-up was exposed, and Maya's name, the name they had tried to erase, was now known across the military network. He looked out at the night sky and whispered, "You did it, soldier." Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter flew over the desert, its lights searching the ruins below, for the woman who refused to stay silent. Morning came slowly, its first light stretching across the desert and touching the ruins where the battle had taken place just hours before. The air was still heavy with smoke and dust. Soldiers moved quietly among the wreckage, searching for survivors. Helicopters hovered above, sending waves of sand into the air. Amid the broken stones and bullet shells, they found signs of a fierce fight, footprints, blood trails, and empty magazines. But Maya was nowhere to be seen. Colonel Hayes arrived soon after. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes red from a sleepless night. He stepped out of the helicopter and looked around, his heart pounding. "Where is she?" he demanded. The search team exchanged uncertain glances. "We found traces of movement toward the ridge," one of them said. "Looks like she tried to get away before the reinforcements arrived." Hayes clenched his jaw and looked toward the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, golden and silent. Somewhere out there, Maya was either hiding or gone. He walked over to the spot where the last firefight had happened. The ground was scorched, and a single piece of fabric from her uniform lay half buried in the sand. He picked it up slowly. It was torn, stained with blood, but unmistakably hers. He closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back the emotion rising in his chest. Just then, his radio crackled to life. "Colonel, you need to hear this," a voice said urgently. He rushed back to the command vehicle where a soldier was monitoring the transmission feed. "It's from the Central Military Network," the man said. "Your data upload went through." On the screen, reports were spreading fast. Major news outlets were broadcasting the files Colonel Hayes had leaked, the hidden missions, the erased records, the truth about Task Force Shadow. The military was under investigation. Several high-ranking officers were already suspended pending inquiry. For the first time, the world was learning what had really happened to Maya's team, how they were sent on a suicide mission and abandoned. Hayes watched the news in silence. Around him, soldiers were murmuring in disbelief. Some were angry, others stunned. But for him, it was bittersweet. He had done what was right, but the cost was unbearable. He had lost the one person who made it possible. Hours later, as the sun climbed higher, a radio technician called out, "Sir, we're getting a weak signal, unregistered frequency, coming from the eastern ridge." Hayes's eyes widened. "Patch it through." There was static for a moment, then a faint voice broke through. It was hoarse, weak, but unmistakable. "This is Maya Carter. If you can hear me, tell the colonel, we finished the mission." Hayes froze. The entire tent went silent. "Maya, this is Colonel Hayes," he said into the radio, his voice trembling. "Where are you? We're coming for you." A soft laugh came through, faint but full of strength. "You always were stubborn, Colonel, but you did it. They can't hide anymore. Maya, stay where you are. We'll find you," he shouted. There was a pause. Then her voice came again, softer this time. "Don't look for me. I'm where I need to be. Tell them my team can rest now. The signal faded, and the line went dead. Hayes called her name again and again, but there was only static. He stood there for a long moment, holding the radio close to his chest. Everyone around him knew what that meant. She had survived the night, but she was gone now, disappearing into the same silence that had once swallowed her past. Days passed and the investigation spread. News reports called it the Shadow Files scandal. The truth was out. The government had sent elite soldiers to die, then erased every record of them. Public outrage grew, and families of the fallen finally got justice. At the base, life slowly returned to normal. Repairs began, new officers arrived, and old secrets were replaced with new rules. But Colonel Hayes couldn't forget. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk past the mess hall and imagine Maya there, quietly cooking, smiling faintly as she handed out meals, pretending to be just a simple cook. One evening, a young soldier approached him. "Sir," he said, holding out a package. "This was found near the ridge during cleanup." Hayes opened it carefully. Inside was a small metal tag. A dog tag, burned and worn but still readable. The name engraved on it made his breath catch. Carter, Maya L. Alongside it was a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, and in faded handwriting, it read, "You can bury a name, Colonel, but not the truth. Thank you for remembering us." He stood there for a long time, the desert wind blowing gently around him. In that moment, he realized that Maya had never truly disappeared. She had become part of the story, the truth that would never die again. Months later, a memorial was built on the edge of the desert where her team had fallen. Soldiers came from all over to pay their respects. The monument was simple, a stone wall with the names of Task Force Shadow engraved on it. At the very top, someone had carved a new line, "For those who were erased but never forgotten." Colonel Hayes stood before it quietly. He placed Maya's dog tag at the base of the stone and whispered, "You're home now." As the sun began to set, a soft breeze swept across the sand, carrying the faint echo of a woman's voice. Steady, strong, and unbroken. Mission complete. He looked toward the horizon and smiled sadly. Somewhere out there, he believed Maya was still alive, living free, far from the reach of the people who tried to destroy her. But whether she was alive or not didn't matter anymore. Her truth had changed everything. From that day on, her story became legend, whispered by soldiers in every camp, told in quiet voices around fires. The tale of the cook who once served in silence but carried the heart of a warrior. And whenever a soldier lost hope, they would look at the sky and remember her name, Maya Carter, the woman who refused to be forgotten, and the soldier who reminded the world that even in silence, truth always finds its voice.